Welcome back. Remember last time we talked about Narmer and how he unifies Egypt and sets Egypt on a course to dominate the Near East? Well, I want to jump a few centuries to my favorite pharaoh, somebody nobody knows about. Sneferu is his name. And he is the pharaoh who is going to take Egypt up a notch. Egypt is going to become an international power. He is going to set artistic conventions that will last for another 2,500 years. And he is going to show Egypt how to build pyramids. Now, this is going to be your pyramid lecture. This is where, through Sneferu, you are going to learn how to build a pyramid and how they got started. But I have to give you a little background. I have to bridge the gap from Narmer to Sneferu so you'll know something about how the pyramids arose. Before Narmer's time, in prehistoric times. Now, when I say prehistoric, all I mean is before writing. And since the Narmer palette is the first written document, before the Narmer palette, people were burying their dead in sand pits. They would simply dig a hole in the desert, put the body in, and cover it over. Now, the reason you bury in the desert is because the soil deposited by the Nile is too valuable to waste for burials for cemeteries. So you take them out in the desert and you bury your deceased. Now, Egypt, of course, as you all know, is hot and dry. Perfect conditions for natural mummification. If you bury something in a hot sand pit with low humidity, it will dehydrate and mummify naturally. You will get a natural mummy because bacteria require moisture to work on tissue. So if you can dry it out before the bacteria can work, it'll be preserved forever. This is how you can have, for example, blueberries in your cereals. You know, they're really basically, it's a mummy of a blueberry. It's dehydrated and bacteria won't attack it. Now, the first burials, as I say, are sand pit burials. But there's a problem with that. Eventually, the sand may blow away, exposing the body to animals, and it's not a very permanent way of burying. So the Egyptians figured out a solution. They still buried in the sand, but they put a structure on top of it so that the sand wouldn't blow away. And it's a structure that they called a mastaba. It's an Arabic word. It means bench. And it's like a bench. It looks like a bench. It's a square rectangular slab, a stone often, and it covers the burial. Now, soon, burials got even fancier. And the Egyptians had the idea of digging down into the bedrock, excavating a chamber beneath the bedrock, putting the body in that, and then put your structure on top of that. So you have a mastaba, a bench-like structure, on top of a pit burial that's in the rock. And this is how the Egyptians buried soon after the time of Narmer. These mastabas, which are superstructures, and the bodies beneath. Now, I want to get us to pyramid building. And it's only a short step from this mastaba to pyramids. Sneferu is going to be the pharaoh who shows Egypt how to build pyramids. And you'll see, he's incredible. Believe me, incredible. But he's not the one who invents the pyramid. That's another pharaoh named Zoser. And one of the things I want you to learn today is that the pyramid shape meant absolutely nothing to the Egyptians. It had no magical power, had no meaning. It's an architectural development, and you'll see. We've got a mastaba, this bench. During the reign of the pharaoh Zoser, his architect, we know his name, Imhotep, gets an idea. He says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a mastaba on top of a mastaba. And then he kept going, and he put another mastaba on top of that, and another one on top of that, till eventually he had 6 tiers, looking like a wedding cake, made out of stone. And that's the first pyramid in history, the step pyramid. And it was built at Saqqara, which was a burial place for the Old Kingdom, the ancient Egyptians. So we have the step pyramid of Saqqara is the first pyramid in history. It's more than just the first pyramid, though. It's also the first stone building in the history of the world. No one has ever built a stone structure like this. It's probably 20 times taller than any other building on Earth. And all of a sudden, Egypt is building in stone. See, it's an interesting thing. Why is Egypt building pyramids now? Why do they get the idea of building pyramids, and why in stone? Well, the answer is they don't have forests. It's a desert country, so you don't have a lot of wood. Their building material was mud brick, made from rich Nile mud, put in molds, dries, and you build your houses out of mud. But with Zoser, we get stone buildings and the first pyramid. Now, another thing, and I think this is really a legacy of Narmer, how can they build pyramids? Why does pyramid building start with Egypt? Why do big buildings start with Egypt? The answer is Narmer has all the power in his hands. He can marshal the people and say, hey, let's do this. So does Zoser, his successor. And Zoser not only says, let's build irrigation channels, he says, let's build my tomb. Now, think about it. Egypt already has a social organization for work projects. They are used to doing big projects, all working together. So they've done this with the irrigation channels for years, for centuries. And now they use the same skills, social skills, organizational skills, to build the first pyramid in history, the step pyramid of Zoser. Right? So it's not an accident that Egypt's the one that builds the pyramids. They have that powerful central leader who can marshal the people to do great things. Now, the step pyramid is really remarkable for a lot of reasons. Another is that it's not just a pyramid. It's a complex. There are temples associated with it. There are shrines. So it's a big, big production, and it's hard to believe that this is the first building in the history of the world in stone. But it is. It just comes out of nowhere. There are no smaller buildings in stone anywhere in Egypt. You can't find a small building. All of a sudden you get this grand step pyramid. So first, we see that the pyramid is a development from pit burials to mastabas to step pyramid. Nobody woke up one day and said, let's build a pyramid. Imhotep got the idea of making a zippy mastaba with another mastaba on top, and then he kept enlarging it. So we get step pyramid as the first pyramid in Egypt and the world. Now, how do we get to the true pyramid? How do we get to a pyramid that's not stepped, but has smooth sides, right? Which is what everybody thinks of in Egypt. Enter my man Sneferu. You will see Sneferu does great things. First, he builds his pyramid. Sneferu wants to have a pyramid. So, like other pharaohs, he starts with a step pyramid. And he builds it at a city called Meidum. It's M-E-I-D-U-M. It's not M-Y-D-O-O-M. It's M-E-I-D-U-M. And at Meidum, he builds a large step pyramid. But then he has the great idea. He will fill it in. He will fill in the steps and make a true pyramid. So the Meidum pyramid is the first attempt at a true pyramid in Egypt. Interestingly, it fails. When anyone looks at the Meidum pyramid, they sort of feel something's wrong. It doesn't look like a pyramid. It looks like a tower that collapsed. There's fairly steep sides, it goes stepped, another tower on top, but the whole base is covered with rubble. All around the pyramid is sand, blocks of stone, and it looks as if the thing collapsed. Now, there was a theory that the pyramid actually collapsed while it was being built because of this pile of rubble at the bottom. There's more reason for that theory, and it's a theory that I believe is wrong, and I'll explain why in a minute. But let me build up the theory. Let me give you the evidence for the theory and see why it's a good theory, just wrong. Next to the pyramid, right next to the pyramid, is a small temple. This is a place where the priests could make offerings for the soul of Sneferu through the centuries. On top of this temple are two stelae. Now, a stela, that's the singular, stele is plural. A stela is a round-top stone. We get our tombstones from them. It looks just like a tombstone, only it's bigger. And these were the ancient Egyptian bulletin boards. If you wanted to say something, you erected a stela in front of a temple, you carved your message on it for the world to see, and they could see it. Sneferu was going to have two stelae, two stelas, on top of his temple that everyone could see. Now, I'll tell you what I think was going to be on it. They were never carved. They are standing there, uninscribed, unfinished. And this is one reason why people think maybe the pyramid collapsed. It was never used. I'm sure of that. On top of the temple are the two stelae. I think he would have had his names. By this time, the Pharaoh had several names. He would have carved his names there so everybody would know whose pyramid and whose temple it was. But it's not there. It's not there. It's unfinished. So we know that this pyramid was unfinished, and not only that, we know that no one was ever buried in it. You can actually go into the burial chamber at Maidum. It's quite an experience because you go all the way down, down, down. The entrance is through the, maybe 100 feet up the pyramid. It's a descending passageway going down, down, down through the pyramid. You're going through a tunnel. It's Indiana Jones type stuff. You're going through the pyramid, and then you reach the burial chamber. Now this is another of Sneferu's innovation. He is not going to be buried beneath the pyramid. He's buried in it. It's above ground. It is the first above ground burial in Egypt. Right? Now this creates a problem. And I want you to think about the engineering marvel of the Maidum pyramid. If you are going to have your burial within the pyramid, think of all the weight bearing down on the ceiling, on the roof of your burial chamber. Hundreds of thousands of tons of rock is piled up above you, bearing down on the ceiling. There is nothing in Egypt that could support that weight. How do you solve the problem of having an enclosed space inside a pyramid? Sneferu solved it. The answer is what we call corbelling. What you do is you take your first level of blocks, and the pyramid is built out of blocks. It's not carved out of one big block. You take your first level of block and you lay that. And the next block moves inward a little bit. It sort of overhangs a bit. And you keep overhanging and overhanging and overhanging so that when you get to the ceiling, you've only got a few inches that the ceiling actually spans, and all the weight of the pyramid is, in a sense, distributed around that little inch or two. So what you're really doing is you're distributing the weight of the pyramid not on the ceiling, but through the body of the pyramid. It's almost like a primeval arch. It's almost like building an arch. By corbelling, 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 getting it in and in, you're almost creating an arch or a triangular kind of structure. So he figures out, I can have a burial chamber inside the pyramid. But the burial chamber was never used. There is no signs of a coffin, no stone sarcophagus, nothing. The pyramid was abandoned before it was ever completed. Why? Well, as I mentioned, someone had the theory, Kurt Mendelsohn is his name, a physicist, that the pyramid collapsed while it was being built. Later excavations showed that Mendelsohn was wrong. Mendelsohn was wrong. The pyramid didn't collapse, but there were structural problems with the pyramid, and I'll tell you what I think they were and why it was abandoned. I think that when Sneferu started to put the casing stones on the pyramid, in other words, filling in the steps, the casing stones weren't securely tied in and they started to slip. There was no big disaster, as Mendelsohn thinks, but it was clearly unstable, and the pyramid was abandoned. Now, how do we know it's Sneferu's? It's uninscribed. The answer is graffiti. Old graffiti. Graffiti of 1,000 years after Sneferu, but still from 3,000 years ago. A priest of the 18th dynasty, well after Sneferu, was there. He visited the pyramid of Maidum. He went into the temple, that little unfinished temple, and he thought it was beautiful. And he wrote on the wall, I was here, I saw the sun shining in the temple of Sneferu and thought it was beautiful. So at least in the 18th dynasty, people remembered this was Sneferu's pyramid. So only because of the graffiti do we know that Sneferu built the Maidum pyramid. Now, let me say this. He didn't just build the Maidum pyramid. It's a complex. He built a temple next to it, and he also built a valley temple, a temple going down from the pyramid. There's a little valley temple, and it's connected by a causeway, a covered little enclosure Now, the Valley Temple was probably where his body was going to be mummified, where it would be preserved in the Valley Temple. Then, in a sacred procession, the priests would carry it through this covered passageway, the causeway, and place it in the pyramid. But this pyramid wasn't used. It was abandoned. What was Sneferu going to do? He needed a place to be buried, and that is the only purpose of the pyramid, as a burial for the pharaoh. Sneferu does not give up, let me tell you. Sneferu decides he is going to build another pyramid. Now, Sneferu has built what is the largest building on earth, the Meidum Pyramid, and it's abandoned. He goes, maybe 10, 15 miles away to a site called Dashur, and he starts another pyramid. It's going to be even larger. It is, again, going to be the largest building on earth. It's called the Bent Pyramid. It's called the Bent because it's not yet a true pyramid. Remember, the first pyramid ever attempted to be a true pyramid is Meidum, but it doesn't work. He then starts to build the next true pyramid. It's called the Bent because it goes up, and after about halfway up, it bends. The angle changes, and it has a real severe bend in it. Now, why a bend? He's trying to build a true pyramid. Why a bend? The answer is there's another disaster. There's another disaster. The bent pyramid is never used either. A pyramid is never built on sand. You can't build a pyramid on sand because the blocks will shift and it will be unstable. Always, every pyramid in ancient Egypt is built on bedrock. You clear the sand away. You level it, level the bedrock, and then you start building your pyramid out of blocks. This is how the Step Pyramid was built at Saqqara. This is how the Meidum Pyramid was built, and they started this way at Dashur also. The Bent Pyramid was built on bedrock. But, two of the corners were on an unstable surface. It wasn't quite bedrock. It was more like gravel. As they built this pyramid, the corners, as the weight sort of increased and increased as it goes up level by level by level, you get tremendous forces. And the base of the pyramid started shifting. Now, by the time it started shifting, they had gotten about halfway up. They had built half a pyramid. And it started moving. Now, at this point, they have built the burial chamber. It's high up in the pyramid, halfway up almost. And it's corbelled. They're doing what they did at Meidum. It's corbelled. But because the pyramid starts to shift, the walls start to crack. And they start to move inward in the burial chamber. Now, I have been in the burial chamber of the Bent Pyramid. It is very dangerous. It is the most dangerous thing I have ever done. In order to get in, I mean, it's not a tourist area. You can't go there. You can see it from outside, and everybody should. It's fabulous. Fabulous. You have to scale the pyramid, climb up the outside. Then you go into the descending passageway, going down. Then you climb a rope ladder. Then you get to a little room where there's another 55-foot ladder going up into the pyramid. You go up the 55-foot ladder, and this is no joke. You then jump across a pit, and then you get to the burial chamber, which is full of bats. Right? So it's real sort of Indiana Jones stuff. But the important thing is, when you get to the burial chamber, you can see the huge cracks on the walls where the pyramid started to implode. It started to move inward. And to keep it from collapsing, Sneferu put cedar beams, thick cedar beams, many feet thick, single beams going across the entire burial chamber, keeping the walls apart. He wedged them in. And that was to keep the burial chamber from imploding, from collapsing. This is another pyramid that he could never use. The burial chamber was full of beams, unsuitable for the pharaoh's burial, and the pyramid is abandoned. Again, he has built the two largest buildings on earth, and he can't use them. Now, what does he do with this bent pyramid? The answer is he finishes it quickly and inexpensively. He makes the bend in the pyramid. He knows he's not going to use it. And he makes the bend in the pyramid because it'll be less material to fill it with. And also it will take some of the pressure off the burial chamber because there's fewer stones needed to fill it in if it's not a true pyramid. Now, why complete it? Why not just say, hey, forget this one? The answer is that the pharaoh wanted two pyramids. The pharaoh, since Narmer's time, is called King of Upper and Lower Egypt. And pharaohs wanted two burials in Sneferu's time, one to show he's king of the north, one to show he's king of the south. So this would be one of his burials. This would be the northern pyramid or the southern pyramid, and he would have another one. So he finishes the pyramid as quickly as he can, as inexpensively as he can, but now time is running out for Sneferu. He's an old man, and he needs somewhere to be buried. What does he do? Great thing about Sneferu. He does not give up, ever. He does not rant and rave as far as we know. He doesn't kill the architect. The architect's his son. Right? He doesn't kill the architect. He says, we build another pyramid. Sneferu now builds a third pyramid at Dashur, less than a mile away from the bent. It's called the Red Pyramid because when the sun is gleaming on it, it kind of has a reddish hue. And he builds the Red Pyramid at a less steep angle. So it won't be quite so tall, but he has to get it finished. He's got to complete the pyramid because time is running out and he's going to die. And he completes it. This is the first true pyramid in history. This is the one in which Sneferu is buried. And this is history. I mean, this is the first true pyramid where our king Sneferu is finally laid to rest. Now think about it. He has built the three largest buildings in the history of the world. An incredible achievement. But that's not all Sneferu does. Let me say this. Sneferu, I think, takes Egypt up another notch and makes it great. I said very briefly in the beginning that he makes Egypt an international power. Sneferu sends a trading expedition to Lebanon to bring back cedars, the very cedars that are inside the burial chamber, holding his bent pyramid burial chamber apart. He sends trading expeditions to Lebanon. Now, this was a big deal for Egypt, a very big deal. Why? Egyptians were not good sailors. They were not. I mean, contrary to what people think, you see it on the tomb walls all the time, these ships going north and south, They were not good sailors because they were spoiled. They were river sailors. They could go up and down the Nile pretty well, but that's not navigational skills. You can see the coast all the time. Also, what spoiled them is that the current goes one way, from south to north, as you know, but the winds, the prevailing winds, go the other way, from north, out of the north, to the south. So, if you want to go northward, you're going with the current. You keep your sails down, you got some oars in there and you're steering, you're doing fine. If you want to go southward, you put your sails up and the wind will blow you and you go against current. So if you ever look at a tomb painting and see a ship, you can tell if it's going north or south. If the sails are up, it's going south. If the sails are down, it's going north. But this spoiled the Egyptians, as I say. They didn't have to, navigate. They never went on the sea. They didn't like to go on the sea. They called the Mediterranean, which is in the north of Egypt, the Wajwur. Now, Wajwur is the ancient Egyptian words for great green. It was the great green. And they didn't like to go on it. They usually used foreign sailors to navigate. So when Sneferu sends an expedition to Lebanon to bring back cedar, it's a big deal. And they needed the cedar for ships. They didn't have forests to build big ships. They also needed the cedar for temple doors. Huge temple doors. When you entered a temple, there were doors 30 feet high, would open. That was cedar of Lebanon. And for the shrines for the gods. So cedar was important. And Sneferu goes to Lebanon. But that's not the only place he goes. He sent expeditions to the turquoise mines in the Sinai. Another major expedition to go into the Sinai. This was foreign land. This was a land which you didn't control. so you had to bring the army with you to protect you. And we have, from the Sinai, rock carvings of Sneferu, in which he is called Smiter of Barbarians. In other words, he killed the foreigners so that he could go into the Sinai and bring back turquoise. I'll tell you a funny story. I wanted to see the turquoise mines in the Sinai that Sneferu had gone to. And this is about 20 years ago. I brought a bunch of my students from my university, and we were going on a tour of Egypt, and we went into the Sinai. We had our four-wheel drive vehicles, and we go into the Sinai, and I'm looking around trying to find the turquoise mines, and we find them. The locals tell us here, here. And the mines are not what you'd expect. They're little tunnels, and a single miner would have to go in and hammer away at the vein, following the vein wherever it goes. Sometimes the tunnels are large, sometimes they're small, but pretty much solitary work. Very difficult to work in there. And I arrive at the turquoise mine, and there's a tunnel, and one of the locals there said, the miner's inside. Now, there was only one miner still mining the turquoise. This is the thing that doesn't pay. And he said, he's inside. His name is Salam. So I yelled inside, Salam! And this little old man comes out, little old man. And I ask him, we're talking in Arabic, and I'm trying to understand what he does. And I say, do you have any turquoise that we could buy? Because it would be great for the kids to have a souvenir of the turquoise mines of Sneferu. And he reaches into his galabeah, those long kaftans that they wear, and he pulls out a little handful of turquoise. And I bought the whole batch, which was like $1 for the whole thing, maybe. And I asked him, I said, how do you make a living doing this? And he said, well, once a month, somebody from the village goes to Cairo in a bus, and he takes my box of turquoise and he sells it and he brings back the money to me. This man couldn't make a decent living doing this. And I said, Salam, why do you do this? And his answer, now it's a rough translation from the Arabic, but his answer is basically, who wants to work 9 to 5? And what he's saying is, and I asked him, what do you mean? And he says, well, look, the people with the goats and the sheep, they have to get up in the morning and feed them every morning and take them to the pasture. For me, if I want to stay in bed, I can stay in bed one day. So there was still one turquoise miner from the mines of Sneferu in the Sinai. It was a major, major expedition. And Sneferu did it, makes Egypt an international power. Now, interestingly, by the way, Sneferu's wife, Pharaohs, had beautiful bracelets with turquoise inlays. We found her tomb. And these are the first turquoise jewelry that we have. And it was really a fabulous thing. But I'll tell you something else about Sneferu that I think is really great. He establishes artistic traditions that will last for another 2,500 years. He had life-size statues carved of his family in stone. And this is the first beautiful life-size statue, and everybody's going to want them for another 2,500 years. You've got there's a pair statue of the kids, his children, Ra-Nefer and Nofret. Nofret is beautiful. She has a wig on, her black wig, and peeking out from underneath you can see her real hair. It's a kind of wonderful detail. So he has these wonderful life-size statues that are important. But that's not all. Sneferu is the first individual in history for whom we have anecdotes. He's a person. See, I couldn't tell you much about Narmer. I know he conquered, but that's about all. There is a papyrus in Berlin called the Papyrus Westcar. It's a magical papyrus. And it tells a story that Sneferu was bored. And he was kind of depressed. And his vizier suggested, listen, why don't you go for a row? Have the young ladies of the harem take you rowing. And the papyrus says they put on fishnet dresses and rowed Sneferu. And as they're rowing, one of the maidens looked overboard, and her turquoise amulet, turquoise from the Sinai mines, was a fish amulet. It fell overboard. And she started crying. And Sneferu stops the ship and says, what's the matter? She explains. And he says, I'll get you another amulet. She says, no, I want that amulet. Now, it's interesting that this is just a rowing girl. But apparently Sneferu was approachable, a human being. She could say, no, I want my mother. He calls his magician. The magician parts the waters. This is before Moses. Parts the waters. The amulet is retrieved. It's on a rock. Gives it back to the young girl. And they begin rowing again, and she's happy. And I think what we get from this is that Sneferu, who shows Egypt how to build the pyramids, who leads it to becoming an international power, was approachable. He didn't do it by being a tyrant. He did it by being a human being. And that's something very special about Sneferu. Next time, we'll visit another special king of Egypt. So I will see you next time.